Greetings, everybody. This is Dr. Jess, speaking with you from Massachusetts in the United States of America. Tonight, I promised in our new blog, The Answers, to talk a little bit about the relevance of genetics. And what I did was create a little PowerPoint presentation. This is going to be no more than 10 minutes, max 15. I'm not going to speak awful fast. There's only a few points that I want you to get. These points are based on all the questions people ask of me constantly. Many of you have this laser focus on the SNPs or the polymorphisms and think that your health is in danger. Okay, and I'd like to set the record straight. So how about we go about this particular. Okay, slideshow, huh? From the beginning. Okay, hopefully you can see all this, and this is the relevance of genetics. In other words, genes and SNPs and pathways. Oh my. Okay, studying genetics is tough. Let me tell you a little secret. I make things easy. Dr. Ben makes things easy. But this is where we started out at the Roche Biochemical Pathways. The link is on the bottom. Okay, and if you really want to lose your hair, okay, try going through this. Okay, you'll get an idea of what's going on, but oh my. So I've been a believer in Albert Einstein's saying that if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you simply don't understand it well enough. So those providers, those doctors who insist on using these long polysyllabic terms, I wonder sometimes. Okay, so we really needed a new way of thinking to understand what all this genetic information means to us when we're sick or even when we're healthy. Like, you know, what's it all about? Well, here's some of the things that you need to know. Number one, you're born with those SNPs. They didn't develop, you were born with them. Okay, so if you weren't sick before, you're not sick now. Your genes are not your destiny. Okay, just because you have the BRCA2 gene polymorphism, if you will, does not mean you're going to get breast cancer. It means that you have the predisposition for it, but it does not mean you're going to get it. So the polymorphisms or SNPs within the biochemical pathways give you a general idea of which pathways may become dysfunctional under an oxidative stress load. In other words, when you get Lyme disease, when you get Candida, when you create a lot of oxidative stress for one reason or another, these are the pathways that may become dysfunctional. So when you get the genetic data, it should raise your index of suspicion for certain pathologies when oxidative stress occurs. At the beginning, the SNPs were put out like this: normal being negative, negative, heterozygous being positive, negative, and homozygous being positive, positive. And what they were, and still are an estimate of the enzyme's function without any other factors involved. So to make this a bit easier, I want you to think of highways of differing widths. Think of normal as an 8-lane highway, heterozygous as a 4-lane highway, and homozygous as a 2-lane highway. Now, even though heterozygous generally means 60% of normal function and homozygous means 20% of normal function, if there is no traffic, what's the big deal? Okay, if there's no traffic, there's no problem. But certainly, if there's traffic, the homozygous is going to get blocked up quicker than the heterozygous. And what is this traffic? This traffic is bacteria, heavy metals, viruses, parasites, food allergens, candida, leaky gut syndrome, excuse me, and we can go on and on and on and on. Those factors that downregulate the enzymatic function and so forth and so on and so on. These will affect the pathways, not a single gene, but usually in a pathway. Okay, but it has to do with the amount of traffic that's there. And by the way, if it's green, if it's negative, negative, the 8-lane highway, does that mean you're good to go? Does that mean that, you know, you'll never get sick? Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think there can be enough traffic to block an 8-lane highway? you think? So the presence of a polymorphism or SNP does not mean you're sick. The absence of a polymorphism or SNP does not mean you're well. All right, Dr. Ben produced a method of looking at the SNPs in a different way to better understand how the body's function might be affected. And this was the original strategy. And I helped. And what he did was put the gene or an enzyme. He put in the cofactors, which make the enzymes work, put in things that would increase the activity, things that would decrease the activity further. And then, of course, put your typical heterozygous and homozygous. Okay, so think about this. This is my biopterin pathway. Okay, and I hope you can see my cursor. But if we go to L-dopamine and how dopamine breaks down and epinephrine, norepinephrine, and so forth, just by virtue of the fact that you see a lot of yellows and reds here, what would that tell you about my tendencies? I would tend to be kind of on the excitable side. And anybody who knows me knows that to be true. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, I'm saying, this person might have some difficulty with excitation. The other thing that strategy, and even the present strategy, tells us is what makes the enzymes work. It's nice to know about the genes, but the genes don't do anything but create an enzyme. And an enzyme needs certain things to work. You need to be at a certain temperature. You need to be at a certain pH. You need to have certain cofactors or coenzymes, vitamins and minerals to work. So this is my folate pathway in the old strategy. And you'll notice where the green is NADPH, NAD. So this is an NAD or B3 dependent pathway. It also needs ATP, which means my mitochondria needs to work in order to get the folate that you're eating converted to this very fancy long term called 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate. When I say something fast, ignore it, where methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase reduces it to the active 5-methylfolate. MTHFR needs FAD and NAD, B2 and B3 to work. But what will slow it down is too much SAMe, cell danger responses, inflammation, reactive oxygen species, inflammation, sulfur, and folic acid. We all know that folic acid is a bad thing. But DHF, dihydrofolate, and we create DHF up here. Now, why would this slow it down? Well, this is the wonder of our bodies. If we have too much of it, this is how it's regulated. There's a mechanism that says to MTHFR, yo, slow down. You got too much DHF. Let's slow down the process so we can balance. Pretty cool, huh? So here's what I want you. Anybody who's got ears to hear, I want you to hear, okay? I'm going to show you how genetics should be used. No, I'm not going to go into every single pathway. If you want to do that, we'll do that some other time. But I want you to see the overview. The genetics that you're reading are your possibilities. They're your genetic predispositions. The causation of your illnesses are the triggering factors. The results are the various forms of expression of the triggering factors. And you might see that like ADD, ADHD, ASD, OCD, EDS, and yada, 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 yada. So it begs the question, where do you intervene? If you're looking at all this stuff, where do you intervene? Well, right here. You can intervene here in between genetic predisposition and triggering. So if you have a baby and you know that it's going to go a certain way and the parents are a certain way and everything kind of lines up, you can control the diet. You can control what kind of water goes in, where you live, looking out for mold and so forth. So certain things don't occur. You can stop it here when factors are triggered and you start realizing that it's not your genetics that have been sitting there waiting for you. I mean, many people think that MTHFR is a deity or a devil that is sitting in the tall grass waiting for them. And that's the farthest thing from the truth. These triggering factors, Lyme disease, candida, yada, 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 are what are going to, if that's good English, create the various forms of expression, which you call symptoms. Okay, these are your downstream effects. So you can intervene with some knowledge here. You can intervene when you notice that there are triggering factors that are causing various forms of expression, or if what you're looking at are the expressions, you can extrapolate backwards. But what you shouldn't do is look at your genetic predisposition and target that for intervention, because there's very little you can do about the genetic predisposition. You can optimize the pathways with vitamins, minerals, and so forth, but you can't change the genes. And a lot of people don't have that straight. So, oops, what's this? Okay, so here's a great example from the scientific literature. And I took this from a research I did for a lecture I did in Osaka, Japan in 2019. Okay, this is a study, newborn screening for autism in search of candidate biomarkers. It was done in 2013 in the magazine Biomarkers in Medicine. This is a peer-reviewed study. Okay, so it is excellent. So here, what they did was identify various groups of genes that, if they were polymorphic, that might give rise to things like increased oxidative stress, autoimmune targeting, increased gastrointestinal dysfunction. So if you understood the genetics here, you would raise your index of suspicion and you'd raise your child a certain way so that the oxidative stress loads wouldn't happen. The benefit of this type of research is that the epigenetics point to specific dysfunctions when there's triggering mechanisms. So you don't have to be chasing your tail for 15 or 20 years. These dysfunctions, that means the oxidative stress load, the decreased methionine metabolism, which is your methylation pathway, gastrointestinal symptoms, and so forth, these dysfunctions are identified as the root causes of autism, which is quite true. And the knowledge of these will allow you to intervene in the presence of the pathology. And it's of great benefit to know the probability so you can prevent this from happening. And for those of you who just got kind of lost, here it is. All right. So polymorphisms here might lead to increased oxidative stress. I apologize for the fuzziness. Okay. Problems here might lead to gastrointestinal dysfunction. Problems here might give you more autoimmune signaling and autoimmune diseases. So genetics tell you what a group of SNPs in a pathway might do when triggered. And I realize I made a mistake there with the what instead of when. Hence, you have a heads up. And this can be used predictively or retroactively. So the learning points here in this particular study, which I was very impressed with, was the authors proved on an acceptable scientific basis that autism has root causes. I treat a lot of autistic kids, and quite successfully, I like to think. And guess what? The common wisdom out there is that autism is a roll of the cosmic dice, and that is simply not true. There are triggering mechanisms that set it off, and there may be predictive powers in determining the genetic SNPs, and you might, if you're a clinician, okay, or a parent, understanding the pathways at the beginning or even in process, you might be able to determine what can be done earlier in the process instead of waiting the 3 or 4 or 5 years to finally get the diagnosis, okay, which doesn't do much anyway. Yes, I understand that you get a lot of help, but all the help that I see has been compensatory rather than curative, okay? And the common wisdom is that autism cannot be cured. And I respectfully disagree. Here's a problem I find with this study that I want to bring forth. The phrase here that diagnosis shortly after birth would be beneficial for the early initiation of treatment. The presumption here that what you would gather from that is that somebody is born with autism. And although the rest of this entire study refutes that, okay, it's a commonly held belief. Autism is caused by something or a set of things. And I'm not going to go into it because you already know what I'll say. How genetics should not be used. And if I insult anybody here, I'm sorry. You're doing the wrong thing. Okay, now I'm going to tell everybody. Not going to use names. Don't feel like getting sued. But Those who are intelligent, which is all of you, will figure it out. Now, when you're looking for genetic tests to be done, okay, look, see if you get the impression that the genetic SNPs are going to be the sole basis of treatment. And I see this a lot. Look out for phrases that are similar to this. Recommendations for a custom nutritional protocol based on your unique genetics. This genetic-based protocol will supplement your missing nutrients and antioxidants. Using genetic testing, you will be guided through a 100% bio-individual nutrition plan that is tailored specifically to your genetic makeup. What the heck is wrong with that, right? What the heck is wrong with that? Let me tell you. First, an individual has innumerable variables that need to be considered, not just the genes. That's why this is so tough. That's why it takes somebody with experience like myself or Sean Bean or Elizabeth Lambert or any of the other people who've been, Dr. Ben Lynch, of course, any of the people who've been doing this for a really long time. We haven't been sitting on our laurels. We've been studying, okay? We've been working. The methods that these other people put out presume that the very presence of a polymorphism or SNP requires intervention, and that's not true. Just because you have polymorphic MTHFR does not mean it's expressing. And treating in this manner, in other words, treating just by the genes, ignores the actual causes of the illness, ignores the innumerable downstream effects, and leads the individual down the garden path wherein healing is least likely. My entire practice is made up of people who have been here, there, everywhere, and they're not getting answers because the practitioners they're seeing may be using something like this and they think it's an answer, but it's not, or looking at certain tests and saying that's the answer and it's not. You've got to look at everything. You've got to look at the entire person, connect the dots, put the puzzle pieces together, however you like to put it, and treat them as a supreme individual. But, and this is called nutrigenomics, by the way, are there some methods of nutrigenomics that are proper, balanced, and in the best interests of the individual? And I'm going to say yes. And you all know about Dr. Ben Lynch's Dirty Genes, the book Dirty Genes, and the strategy that followed it. Well, in this particular case, okay, what Dr. Ben did, and I know the years he spent doing it, okay, he considered the key polymorphisms that led a person to go astray and recommended that they do what we call foundational treatment or bioterrain treatment. He calls it soak and scrub. In other words, reducing stress, improving hydration, improving nutrition in order to optimize the pathway. Do you know how many people can be cured by simply doing the simple stuff, the mundane stuff? And the reason they don't do it is because they feel like it's too simple. It's got to be complex. I've been sick for too long. It's got to be complex. And if they think about it, these things that I'm about to mention have never been done. So this imaginative work by Dr. Ben frames healing in the form of soak and scrub and spot cleaning, which at the same time de-emphasizes the idea that treating polymorphisms and emphasizes in all cases that support of the body's foundation is the key to healing. And that is true. So here's Dirty Genes in a heartbeat. Dr. Ben took 7 basic genes and helped you determine their function by questionnaire, no testing. He asked you to clean up your act, soak and scrub. And if the behavioral changes help, those behavioral changes help clean up your dirty genes. If in fact there's still stuff to do, retesting via questionnaire, identify areas that need more help, and then more basic natural solutions are offered, in other words, spot cleaning. And then very reasonably, if the symptoms or conditions remain, Dr. Ben and any of us would advise you to seek the help of a qualified practitioner. And people, that's how it should be done. That's how you use the genes. This is my histamine pathway on the new strategy, okay? The way a practitioner would look at this is just give you a little bit of background. Gene, okay? If you see purple, it means that it's working slowly, innately. If it's kind of on the yellow side here, it's intermediate. If it's fast, it'll be this color. And if it's multicolored, it's complicated. Like you've heard many ladies say to you, okay, if you're a guy. But if we look at this, just glance, what would you say about my ability to break down histamine? I'm not going to talk about how it gets there and so forth. Well, this is the outside the cell, and this is inside the cell. Clearly, this is going to be slow. So I'm going to need support here, because one of the reasons I may be ill is because I'm not breaking down histamine outside my cells. Here, in the intracellular pathway, the HNMT looks good, Sammy, and then it becomes N-methylhistamine, and MAOA and MAOB break it down to an aldehyde. But this aldehyde dehydrogenase family works slow. So even if these guys are working good, this is going to slow it down. There's going to be a backup. Put this and this together, plus this minor pathway with the NAT2 being slow, and the end result is too much histamine. How do you fix it? That's a story for another day, okay? But just by glancing at this, I'm going to say to myself, if this were my patient, this person's going to have difficulty breaking down histamine. If they're not getting better, that's going to cause leaky cells, because guess what? That's what histamine does, rips open cells. And let me dive into how I can help them metabolize their histamine better. And right after that, go after why there's so much histamine being created. Okay, it's one of the ways of using this. So let me leave you with a couple of thoughts. Realize that you may understand physiology right down to the quantum level, but you can only intervene at the global level. You cannot tell the body what to do. You can provide the body with what it needs, and then you need to get out of the way and let the body do what it's supposed to do. Okay, that's a good guiding principle. Anybody with a complex multifactorial illness that is not getting better, you can schedule a free 30-minute get acquainted session with me by going to my website, drjessarmour.com. You can also ask me questions on Facebook or Instagram. You see the links there. I really appreciate you listening. Next week, we're going to go over a different aspect of health. And yes, I realize that this was an overview, but believe it or not, if you understand the overview, you're going to start healing. Let me just say, have a good week. I look forward to speaking with you again. Take care. This is Dr. Jess.